the USS for tragedy on December 17, 1927. The U.S. Navy submarine USS-4 was conducting routine speed trials off Provincetown, Massachusetts. The submarine was running submerged along a measured nautical mile, testing her maneuverability beneath the surface. At the same time, the U.S. Coast Guard destroyer Pauling was steaming toward the harbor at 18 knots, searching for rum-running vessels during Prohibition. At 3:37 p.m., as S-4 began to surface, an officer aboard Pauling suddenly spotted the faint wake of a periscope directly off the ship's port bow. He immediately ordered full right rudder and engines astern, but there was no time to avoid the collision. Pauling's bow slammed into the submarine, tearing 2 massive holes in ES-4's hull. The submarine sank almost instantly, plunging to the seabed 100 feet below the surface. Of the 40 men aboard, 34 were killed immediately by the impact and flooding, but 6 men survived, trapped inside the forward torpedo room. The next morning, rescue vessels arrived on scene. Veteran Navy diver Thomas Eddy descended to the wreck. When he struck the torpedo loading hatch with a hammer, he received a chilling response: 6 slow taps coming from inside. That men were alive. For the rest of that day and the next, divers fought brutal conditions, struggling to attach an air hose to the submarine. A powerful nor'easter swept through the bay, bringing high winds, rough seas, and freezing temperatures. Inside the torpedo room, 25-year-old Lieutenant Graham Fitch and his 5 men lay quietly in their bunks, wedged between torpedoes. Wrapped in blankets, they breathed slowly, carefully conserving oxygen. They could hear the divers working above them, but the storm only grew worse. At 8:45 p.m., one diver's airline became dangerously fouled. Exhausted but determined, Eddy went down again to try to save his fellow diver. By December 22nd, 5 days after the collision, the tapping stopped. All 40 men aboard USS S-4 were officially confirmed dead. The 6 men in the torpedo room had survived for nearly 3 days, trapped in total darkness beneath the sea, waiting for a rescue that never came. The USS Thames tragedy on the night of October 24, 1944. Commander Richard O. Kane positioned the American submarine USS Thames for what would become her final attack in the Taiwan Strait. Over the previous 2 days, Thames had already devastated Japanese shipping, sinking multiple enemy vessels. Now, near Turnabout Island, the submarine surfaced to finish off a damaged transport. The crew had been at battle stations for hours, exhausted but focused. During this patrol, Tang had fired 22 torpedoes. 21 of them had struck their targets. Only 2 torpedoes remained. At 2:30 a.m. on October 25th, O'Kane gave the order to fire the 23rd torpedo. It ran hot, straight, and normal toward the crippled transport, just 900 yards away. The crew watched as it struck home. 1 torpedo remained. O'Kane ordered the final Mark 18 electric torpedo loaded and set to a depth of 10 feet. At close range, the weapon was fired. For the first few seconds, everything appeared normal. Then, without warning, the torpedo broached the surface, porpoising wildly. Moments later, it veered sharply left and entered a circular run, curving directly back toward Thames herself. O'Kane shouted for emergency speed and ordered the rudder thrown hard over. The submarine accelerated and turned desperately, but there was no escape. Just 20 seconds after firing, Tang's own torpedo slammed into her stern near the aft torpedo room. The explosion was catastrophic. The submarine's rear compartments flooded instantly. Thames plunged stern-first toward the ocean floor, sinking rapidly to a depth of 180 feet. 9 men had been on the bridge during the attack. O'Kane and 8 others were blown into the sea by the blast. Inside the submarine, some crew members attempted to escape using mumps and lungs, but the freezing water claimed most of them. Out of the 87 men aboard USS Thames that night, only 9 survived. The following morning, Japanese escort ships rescued them from the water. One of the most successful American submarines of World War II had been destroyed by her own torpedo. Sergei Preminin and the K-219 sacrifice on October 3, 1986. The Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-219 was on routine patrol in the Atlantic Ocean, roughly 680 miles northeast of Bermuda. The aging submarine carried 16 nuclear-armed ballistic missiles and a crew of 119 men. At around 5 p.m., disaster struck. A seal in missile tube number 6 failed, allowing seawater to flood the tube. The water reacted violently with residual missile fuel. Just minutes later, at 5:14 p.m., the missile exploded. 3 sailors were killed instantly. Thick, toxic fumes filled the submarine's compartments. Captain Igor Britnov ordered the submarine to surface and initiated an emergency shutdown of the nuclear reactors. But almost immediately, a far greater danger emerged. Temperature gauges on the submarine's twin nuclear reactors began climbing rapidly. With power systems damaged and control mechanisms failing, the automatic reactor shutdown system had been destroyed. A nuclear meltdown in the middle of the Atlantic became a real and immediate threat. The only way to stop it was to manually lower the reactor control rods, a task that required someone to enter the reactor compartment itself. Lieutenant Nikolai Belikov volunteered. Accompanying him was 20-year-old seaman Sergei Preminin. Wearing gas masks and protective suits, they entered the reactor compartment, where temperatures exceeded 70 degrees Celsius (158 The heat was overwhelming. Belikov managed to manually lower 3 of the 4 control rod assemblies before collapsing from exhaustion. Preminin dragged the unconscious officer back to safety, but 1 control rod remained active despite being exhausted and knowing the danger. Sergei Preminin volunteered to go back in alone. Using the last remaining oxygen canisters, he re-entered the reactor compartment. Fighting extreme heat and toxic air, he manually cranked down the final control rod. He succeeded. The nuclear meltdown was prevented. But when Preminin tried to leave, the hatch would not open. A dangerous pressure differential had built up between the reactor compartment and the corridor outside, sealing the door shut. Crew members on the other side tried desperately to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. Inside, Preminin's oxygen ran out. The 20-year-old sailor died alone in the reactor compartment, the same compartment he had just saved. 3 days later, K-219 sank in the Atlantic Ocean. Sergei Preminin's sacrifice prevented a nuclear catastrophe and remains one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in Cold War naval history. Ki-278 Komsomolets fire beneath the Arctic Sea on April 7, 1989. The Soviet nuclear-powered submarine K-278 Komsomolets was cruising at a depth of 1,100 feet in the Norwegian Sea, approximately 112 miles southwest of Bear Island. It was her first operational patrol. Komsomolets was unlike any submarine ever built. Constructed with a titanium pressure hull, she could dive to 3,350 feet, the deepest dive ever achieved by a military submarine. She was a technological marvel, designed to survive where no other vessel could. At 10:55 a.m., the calm was shattered. Power fluctuations rippled through the submarine. Minutes later, a fire erupted in Compartment 7. A high-pressure airline had ruptured, spraying oil onto a superheated turbine. The blaze was fed by compressed air at nearly 8,000 pounds per square inch, turning the compartment into an inferno. Smoke spread rapidly through cable penetrations, flooding adjacent sections of the boat. The nuclear reactor scrambled automatically and Komsomolets lost propulsion. Captain Yevgeny Vanin ordered an emergency blow. Just 11 minutes after the fire began, the submarine broke the surface. Most of the crew evacuated onto the deck, while the captain and 5 officers remained inside, desperately trying to save their ship. But compressed air continued to fuel the fire deep within the hull. At 4:30 p.m., more than 5 hours after surfacing, Komsomolets began to sink. Captain Vanin ordered the crew on deck to abandon ship. He and 4 officers entered a special escape capsule built into the submarine's sail. In the confusion, they lost track of their 6th companion. With no time left, the 5 men sealed the hatch and activated the system. The escape capsule rocketed to the surface. But upon surfacing, a catastrophic design flaw triggered an explosive decompression. The hatch blew open violently. 2 men were killed instantly. Captain Vanin and another officer were knocked unconscious. Only 1 man escaped alive. Meanwhile, 50 crew members were left floating in the freezing Arctic waters. Rescue efforts were slow. The first vessel to arrive was not a naval ship, but a civilian fishing trawler, which reached the scene 1 hour and 20 minutes later. By then, hypothermia had claimed 34 more lives. In total, 42 of the 69 crew members perished. The submarine that could dive deeper than any other was ultimately defeated not by the depths but by fire, cold, and time. AS-12 Losharik fire in the deep on the evening of July 1, 2019. The Russian special-purpose nuclear submarine AS-12 Losharik was conducting deep-sea operations in Russian territorial waters of the Barents Sea. Losharik was one of the most secretive submarines ever built. Unlike conventional submarines, her pressure hull consisted of 7 interconnected spherical titanium compartments, a design that allowed her to dive to depths estimated at up to 20,000 feet. The vessel was used for classified missions on the ocean floor, including cable operations and seabed research. The crew aboard that night represented the elite of the Russian Navy. Among them were 7 captains of first rank, and 2 sailors who had been awarded the title Hero of the Russian Federation. Command of the mission rested with Captain Denis Donskoy at approximately 8:30 p.m. Moscow time, while operating at a depth of around 1,000 feet. A short circuit occurred in the battery compartment. Losharik had recently been equipped with lithium-ion batteries, a technology still relatively unproven in submarine service. The electrical fault ignited a fire. Once burning, lithium-ion batteries combust with extreme intensity, releasing dense, highly toxic smoke. The crew immediately began fighting the fire. Smoke rapidly filled the confined compartments as temperatures rose. Sailors donned portable breathing apparatus and continued battling the blaze for more than 40 minutes. As oxygen supplies dwindled, the crew requested permission to evacuate. At the time, Losharik was docked to her mothership, a larger nuclear submarine. A foreman rescue team entered Losharik to assist with evacuation and damage control. They managed to rescue 1 civilian technical specialist, but conditions inside the vessel continued to worsen. Then the battery compartment exploded. The blast, combined with overwhelming smoke and toxic fumes, proved fatal. The remaining crew members inside Losharik, along with the entire rescue team, were incapacitated within moments. At approximately 9:30 p.m., fishermen in the area reported seeing a submarine surface rapidly. Losherik was later towed to the naval base at Severomorsk. 5 crew members survived, suffering from smoke inhalation and concussions. 14 men were found dead inside the submarine, including all members of the rescue team. All 14 were later buried with full military honors in St. Petersburg. One of Russia's most advanced submarines designed to survive the crushing depths of the ocean was ultimately defeated by fire, smoke, and seconds that ran out too quickly. OceanGate, Titan tragedy. On the morning of June 18, 2023, the experimental submersible Titan began its descent toward the wreck of the RMS Titanic. Resting 12,500 feet below the surface of the North Atlantic Ocean, aboard the vessel were 5 people: Stockton Rush, CEO of OceanGate and pilot of the craft; Paul-Henri Nargeolet, a renowned French Titanic expert; Hamish Harding, a British businessman and explorer; Shahzada Dawood, a Pakistani businessman, and his 19-year-old son Sulman Dawood. Titan launched from the support ship Polar Prince at approximately 8:00 a.m. local time. Unlike traditional deep-sea submersibles built from steel or titanium, Titan's pressure hull was constructed primarily from carbon fiber, an unconventional and largely untested material for repeated deep-ocean dives. Stockton Rush piloted the submersible using a modified Logitech video game controller. Over the years, multiple engineers and industry experts had raised serious concerns about Titan's experimental design, structural fatigue risks, and its lack of independent certification. Rush publicly dismissed those warnings, arguing that innovation required risk. Communication between Titan and the Polar Prince was conducted via short text messages. The descent initially appeared normal. About 30 minutes into the dive, contact was lost, something that had occurred on previous missions. Communication resumed nearly an hour later. At 1 hour and 33 minutes into the descent, at approximately 9:45 a.m., Titan transmitted its final message, reporting that 2 descent weights had been released, a routine maneuver. 6 seconds later, an automated system ping was detected. After that, there was silence. The support crew waited. Titan's scheduled resurfacing time passed with no contact. At 5:40 p.m., when the submersible failed to return, the U.S. Coast Guard was notified. A massive international search and rescue operation was launched. For 4 days, the world watched as ships, aircraft, and remotely operated vehicles searched the North Atlantic, racing against Titan's estimated 96-hour oxygen supply. On June 22, a remotely operated vehicle located a debris field approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic. Fragments of Titan's pressure hull were scattered across the seafloor. Subsequent analysis of classified acoustic data revealed that at the moment communication was lost, sensors had detected a brief, violent sound consistent with a catastrophic failure. Titan's carbon fiber pressure hull had imploded. The collapse occurred in milliseconds, generating forces so extreme that survival was impossible. All 5 occupants died instantly, without time to react or experience suffering. The tragedy marked one of the most high-profile deep-sea disasters in history and reignited global debate over risk, regulation, and responsibility in private exploration. If you'd like to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe, and feel free to leave suggestions for future videos in the comments.